Professor Carol Clark, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. How are you, first of all?
Very well, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
And very interesting to be in a recording studio.
Yeah, well, sort of. I'll show you our proper recording studios after this. Then you won't think so much of this one, I don't think. I think first things first, let's just get straight to what's coming up this week, which is coming on Friday, Women's Health Symposium. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What's it all for? What sort of things will be covered? That sort of thing.
So we're very lucky that our PGR student, Rosie Harper, has a very keen interest in women's health. And at the same time, and so she's been organising this, and she raised the funding. So she raised the funding from the Doctoral College and through WAN, the Women's Academic Network. Her PhD is around women's health and in particular management of incontinence in women pre-pregnancy and post-pregnancy, or maybe through life. And at the same time, we have changed the Centre for Midwifery, Maternal and Perinatal Health to the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health. And the reason behind that is because we want to link in with the Women's Health Strategy. The Women's Health Strategy for the UK was published last year in August 2022, and the Women's Health Ambassador is Dame Leslie Regan, who is going to open the conference. So it's linking all these elements together.
Fantastic.
This is specifically a PGR conference, and so
which means postgraduate researchers.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And so all the research is from them, and so after Leslie Regan's keynote, then each of the PGRs are going to have their chance to showcase their research, and then we will have some posters up in an adjacent room and some networking from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's this Friday. What's the date on Friday? I should have written that down.
It's Friday the 14th.
Friday the 14th, just in case people are watching this after Friday and they think, it's on this Friday.
Oh,
so Friday the 14th of July, 2023,
That's
we should say.
Right.
Yeah.
It's online as well. So we've got quite a few people coming joining us online. So the online will be from 2 to 4, and then the networking from 4 to 5, which will obviously for people in person.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's a really good chance, as you say, to showcase the postgraduates' work, and hopefully give them a bit of a springboard into becoming fully fledged academics as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you mentioned the Women's Academic Network. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What is that, and what are its aims? Are you familiar with that?
I am. They're. I think the Women's Academic Network is a sort of support group within the university. They have their own sort of email list. Everybody's welcome onto it, but they do try and raise sort of women's issues, and I'm not a member of their their sort of the leadership group, but it does keep us in contact with what's going on around the university and externally, and they organise lectures and talks and things. But I think that also links in with Athena Swan, and obviously the university is looking to get an institutional Athena Swan. We have got bronze, but obviously these sort of each after several years you try and apply for silver Athena Swan and then gold Athena Swan.
Right.
And various departments across the university are also applying for their Athena Swan badge, so to speak.
Right, yeah. And Athena Swan is about equality in general, is it?
Yes, equality in general, across the board. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Fantastic. What was the other thing I was going to ask you? So this is what I was going to ask. So can I ask why the focus on women's academic network and women's health specifically, both from your personal perspective and perhaps a strategic perspective. Why is there such a focus at the moment on helping women more so than men, or just everyone in general? 20 years ago there probably wasn't these things that are called sort of labelled women's a thing. Maybe there were some, but it seems more prevalent today. Can you explain why that is to people wondering, why is there all this sort of, it feels like favouritism or on women or something like that, if someone said that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, whether it's, maybe we start with that favouritism.
Okay.
Women have heart attacks, just like men have heart attacks, and suffer from heart disease. It's their biggest killer. And yet only 25% of the research is done in women who have heart attacks.
Right.
Women who have a stroke are more likely to be ignored because they get different symptoms to a man who's having a stroke. And the same with a heart attack. So there is a need to focus our research and our understanding of women's issues. And it's not just women's health as in women's pelvic health, women who are pregnant, etc. Or have the menstruation and postmenopausal or premenopausal or whatever. It's about the way in which women their health that we've looked at predominantly in men. So, for example, another example is that children with developmental coordination disorder, which is dyspraxia, we always thought that it was predominantly a condition that boys presented with.
Right.
And so boys are referred to child health for their diagnosis and then for their treatment. The reason boys are presented and referred on is because they're the disruptors in the classroom.
I see.
Girls with the same condition sit at the back of the classroom very quietly and don't necessarily engage. So they have a completely different set of symptoms, but they've got the same condition. But they present in a different way, and that often goes unnoticed throughout their life until something happens and suddenly finds it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It's the same with autism. That's another condition that predominantly is seen in males, or that's when it's diagnosed in young boys and young males. It's less likely to be diagnosed in women because they seem to hide it a little bit more.
Right. Do you think those differences in the outward behaviour of the same condition is a genetic thing, or do you think it's a cultural, the way girls and boys are raised differently? Like, why would there be that difference?
In all fairness, I don't know the answer to that. But it's not just, say, for example, that I've talked about autism and dyspraxia. We know, for example, with chronic pain, more women suffer from chronic pain than men. I did my own PhD research around a condition called joint hypermobility syndrome, which also is similar to Ehlers-Danlos hypermobility syndrome. You may have heard of Ehlers-Danlos, but Ehlers-Danlos...
I have not, I'll be honest. But please enlighten me.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and joint hypermobility syndrome are part of a genetic group of connective tissue disorders where people have many symptoms. And again, the prevalence of that condition is higher amongst women than men. In my own study, which was looking at those patients who attended a clinic in London, 92% were were women, and only 8% were men.
Right.
And that's a condition with multiple manifestations. So, for
That's
example,
a huge difference, isn't it?
it's a
92% to 8%.
big difference.
Wow.
And that's a condition that is kind of, we call an invisible condition, because it's not many people know about it. It's under recognised by many clinicians, but it's got and again, it's a very complex condition. It comes with not only chronic pain, but people might have what we call postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, which they get sort of dizziness and a high heart rate. They may have symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, and yet they don't actually have an irritable bowel, but the symptoms are like that, because they've got a sort of functional gastrointestinal problem. And then they, as I say, different types of pain. So they may have pain in many joints, they may have dislocations, they tend to be very bendy, or can be, some of them tend to be bendy. When I talk about bendy or hypermobile, I'm talking about what you might see amongst gymnasts and ballerinas, that sort of where the joints sort of go beyond hyperextension.
Yeah. I'm aware of that because I snapped my ACL once. And
very.
That was painful.
Yes, that was painful.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
And my wife's done both of hers on both legs as well,
right.
playing netball.
Okay.
So I did football, and hers was for netball. So we're both familiar with that.
Well, now coming back, that's interesting, because with the recent explosion of football,
women's football.
Well, women's football. Yep. Women are more likely to have ACL ruptures than men for the same number of playing hours. So that's that, that we've got data dating back to they looked at this quite a lot in the States with their soccer, and because they brought in a lot of women into soccer scholarships in the universities. In America, well over 20 years ago, and that was something they began to see was, they were getting many more ACL ruptures in women compared with men. So
interesting. So just to return to the original question that I probed about favouritism, this is actually more like a levelling of the playing field, so to speak. Excuse the pun.
That's right. Yeah.
Because women suffer from these problems more, they go unnoticed more. This is more about balancing the books.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Consider myself educated on that point. Thank you. Okay. What else was I going to ask on that point? So the Women's Academic Network is a specific one that I've heard. Obviously, it's been emailed around and things like this. So you've justified very nicely there why we need to sort of level this playing field. But from my perspective, being a male who also feels like I need help from time to time, it does feel a little bit exclusory at times. And it feels like there's lots of things at the moment, to promote women. And obviously there are things that naturally men can also do that are just, non-gendered at all. But it feels like when you see the title, Women's Academic Network, it's like, okay, well, I don't feel invited to that almost. Do you know what I mean? So do you have any sort of response to that, or especially I think for maybe 20-year-old men at the moment, or emerging, and they see this world where they're told, there's this sort of patriarchal control and all this, but then they feel within themselves, maybe I don't feel like I have that power myself, above many women who I know, and yet the focus is on sort of turning that table somehow. The table that doesn't feel like it needs to be turned. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Because that's almost an issue in itself. Is how do we level this out without kind of discriminating in any way?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had this conversation with my son-in-law, who would agree with you absolutely entirely. In all fairness, I don't have any answers. what I see is a big challenge. If we go back, a big challenge for women who are striving to be the best, at work, at home, as a mother, and putting themselves under enormous strain. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't men who are also helping with the family.
Yeah.
And so I'm not necessarily answering your question, because I actually don't quite know the answer myself.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I'm just to clarify as well. I understand there's a problem that needs addressing in terms of leveling things out for women. So I'm not saying that should disappear, but I'm just not certain that this is the correct solution at the moment. But I don't know either.
I certainly think that we need to work to understand what are the barriers. I mean, what you want to do is to enable everybody to achieve their potential, and obviously that's got to be done in different ways. I look at my colleagues coming back to work after having had children and trying to work in a very competitive academic atmosphere, and I think it's really tough.
It's a massive challenge. Yeah.
A massive challenge. You might feel the same being a father.
But I do, but I think that's certainly to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
I think women definitely, just going through that whole process, the body changing and all that stuff is a massive challenge in itself, and then having to refocus on your career after nurturing this baby for a year or 2 years, however long the full processes of sort of being off work and all that stuff is a tremendous challenge.
That's right. And I mean, I look at my own what I did. We happened to be working in the Middle East at the time that I had my first child, and they gave you 40 days maternity leave, and then I went back to work, but they did give you time for breastfeeding. So I would do 3 hours ago. I had somebody to help with childcare. I'd go home, breastfeed, came back for a couple of hours, and so it was a more split up day. Now I managed that for a year, just over a year or something, and then I was pregnant again, and I thought, well, I think I'm going to take a break now, because I couldn't go part time. It was either work full time or not at all. So I took.
Why was that?
That was the laws in the country.
Oh, I see. Right.
They didn't. So my colleagues who some of them, especially national colleagues, carried on working, but they only got that short time. So it's something that's something that's worked out slightly differently. And then we went to. We then moved to Nigeria, where I could only work in the voluntary sector, but that was obviously very part-time, the work that I did there. And then...
Right. What were you doing in the Middle East initially?
It was really, we followed my husband's career,
okay.
But I worked in the National Oil Company occupational health clinic as a physiotherapist. So that was very interesting. I used to, we were working in Qatar, so I used to work in Doha, which was the capital, and then one day a week I had to travel to the other side of the peninsula, to Dukhan, where we had a small clinic, and the small clinic also used to look after the Bedouin, the local tribal group over there.
Wow.
And that was interesting. I had I knew a little bit of Arabic, but not brilliant, and I could always rely on a translator coming in and helping me. And I remember one day 2 ladies coming in, obviously fully masked up, and very, very friendly, very chatty.
Masked up as in terms of the
they
tribal...
had a tribal mask,
see.
and obviously their hijab, and they were fully dressed up.
Right.
And the lady had a sore knee, so I did an examination and I treated her. And I said, well, maybe she could come back and see me in a week's time. I gave her some exercises to do. We had a good laugh about her, doing the exercises and things like that. And I came back, and then the next week, the two ladies came back in, and the lady sort of lifted up her sort of trousers for me to have a look at her knee. And I said to the translator, oh, this doesn't appear to be the same knee as I was seeing yesterday, last week.
As in, it was the opposite knee?
No, it was the same. It was the right-hand knee, right. But it didn't look like the same knee. So he chatted to them. They said, oh, yes, it was her sister, and her sister was coming to see me this time. And I said, well, hang on, but last week was a referral from... have we got another referral? No, they like to share things. So if one gets something, the other must have the same thing as well. So that would give you an ethical dilemma, didn't it?
So wait, does this mean that they went out of their way to injure her knee in order for her to feel the same pain? Is this what you mean? Or is it that they just wanted to share the experience? Oh, okay, well, that's an interesting way of approaching things, I suppose.
Well, that's what I gained from the translator. Anyway, they were quite animatedly telling the translator, what they wanted.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. What a fascinating experience to have worked over there. What did your husband do, out of curiosity? Or what does he do?
Yes, he worked for the oil industry.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably something that sounds negative, but actually,
it's
one of those things. We can't, at the moment, we can't live without oil, can we?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's not delve down that controversial topic, but yeah. So, in terms of levelling out the playing field, what we're saying is basically this stuff is necessary, and perhaps another solution needs to be found to not disempower young men at the moment. I do think there is some sort of kind of issue with that at the moment as well, myself. But perhaps that's a separate issue.
But I think, I agree. I think we need strategies that empower both men and women.
Everyone,
and those,
as you say, yeah.
Everyone. And those strategies might need to be a little different because the needs of all of us are slightly different. So how you bring on women who are coming back from maternity leave might be different to how you empower young men coming straight, say, for example, straight into academia from having done a PhD. So I think we need different strategies, and I think you're absolutely right. We must not ignore young men who may need confidence building.
I didn't mean to hijack the conversation and push this into men's rights territory, by the way, in case anyone listening is thinking, hang on, why are we talking about men's rights here when it's
it's the rights of everybody, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think you're absolutely right in the pregnancy specifically is a massive thing that can potentially detriment women's careers. Do you think that's often the case, that they find it then harder to keep up with male colleagues who have had the 2 years or whatever of just continuous progress, and because there's that gap, do you think some women then find it harder to sort of catch up or keep up?
That's an interesting conversation. I think it's I think Goldman Sachs or something offers paternity leave, 6 months paternity leave. And yet not many men want to take that paternity leave because, I believe anyway, this is what I've heard, is because they feel that then they won't be around to
progress,
to
take
progress.
The opportunities and whatnot.
From my own experience, that time out, bringing up your children and doing voluntary work and juggling, I've never found as being negative. In fact, I found it as being as being the foundations for sort of leadership and organisation. So, for example, when we went to live in Oman, I took on the role of deputy head of department, and my head of department wasn't really there. We had to build the rehabilitation program across the country. I was given the opportunity to do that, and so I felt that all the voluntary work and the working with the children, and I used to sometimes help out as a class mum and things like that. All of that had helped me in developing my skills, my leadership skills, and communicating and things like that with others. And then I was able to use that, when I came to Bournemouth University, because, I started, when I was in Oman, I actually didn't even have a degree, because when I trained as a physiotherapist, we got a graduate diploma back in the 80s. And it wasn't until the 2000s that I went off and got a master's degree, and then later on joined Bournemouth University, and then did a PhD. And so I think women need to reflect on the fact that bringing up a family and maybe doing some part-time work and juggling all the other commitments around looking after maybe elderly parents or being a caregiver, all of those things are giving you experience that you can use in building your career. Now, I maybe that won't be the case for every career, but I think it's something that people should consider.
That's a really interesting insight. I think maybe that maybe your perspective on that has helped you turn it into a positive. Do you know what I mean? Perhaps others, they're thinking of it as a negative, and so it becomes a negative almost. Is perhaps something along those lines.
I think, and the other thing is taking opportunities. All the way along, I've had to take opportunities. For example,
put yourself forward and be confident in your own abilities, and sort of put your hand up.
Put my hand up. That's right. I'm not saying I'm confident every time I put my hand up. I'm not necessarily.
Is it a fake confidence sometimes?
It will be. Yes.
That's a skill in itself, though, isn't it? That's a skill in itself.
Or, but not being too worried about being out of my comfort zone.
Or the fear of failure and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I've failed so many times that it's probably is no longer a problem. All the way through school, I failed in various exams and tests, and I remember when I first got to my secondary school and I wanted to go out and play hockey, and they said, hang on, you're so small, we don't want you getting hurt, so we don't want you on the hockey team.
Oh, God,
I could go to hockey practice. Well, of course, that made me really determined. Did
you make it to the team eventually?
I did.
Good on you.
I did. I eventually captained the first team.
Wow, well done. What a story.
But it's things like that. I think, and I think that if you have failure, and you can come back for it. It's just like all the way through academia, isn't it? Rejection after rejection, whether it's a paper or and you put it in again and things like that, or whether it's a grant. How many rejections do you get? It's multiple.
I'm not an academic, I'll be honest, but I get lots of other rejections in life. Don't worry.
We have to sort of think, oh well, I'll grow from that one.
Yeah. It's still at the moment for me. It's still a little bit of a blow. I guess it is for everyone. It's always a blow, a little bit to your ego and whatnot. But, but as you say, the more often you feel that feeling, the more you get used to it, and the more it just doesn't mean anything anymore. I often think that about a lot of things in life. The first time you do anything, that's 100%. It represents 100% of the experience of that particular thing. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
The second time, it's 50%. Third time, 33%, and so on and so forth, until eventually it's 1% of your entire experience of doing that thing. If you've done it 100 times, suddenly it's,
Yeah.
whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the message, isn't it, for people, is to fail and feel comfortable with failing until you become a success at something.
Yeah, and but isn't it funny how when my kids were at school, I remember sports days were all about taking part, and I'm all for that. But nobody won or lost. They used to have sports days where nobody won or lost.
I think we have that. Yeah, my children have, or my eldest has a similar sort of ethos at the moment.
Yeah, and so you're thinking, so we're not learning at an early age from failure and how to take it. And I'm saying to you that I think I failed so many times as I was going along my journey through school that I learnt.
That's a very good point.
So I wonder, I don't have all the answers at all, but I wonder whether that's something that sort of builds your own resilience.
I think so, yeah. And we do have a tendency to sugarcoat things for children a little bit these days, which, as you say, is detrimental in that respect, definitely, to the life lessons you need to learn.
Yeah.
If you want to be a success at things, anyway.
Yeah, you need to, learn the hard way. Yeah.
So, Carol, I wonder, I did a bit of research into your research that you've done, and I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of this stuff, because some of it sounds really interesting and intriguing. The first one that I came across, non-pharmacological management of pain. So is this a study that you did in tandem with others? Talk to us a little bit about this.
So that's kind of probably sort of an ethos. So as a physiotherapist, I have not done any education around prescribing. You can, as a physiotherapist, learn to become an independent prescriber.
I didn't know that.
But I'm not. And so the non-pharmacological management of pain, my experience is about being around managing people with joint hypermobility syndrome, as I was alluding to earlier. So they have a chronic pain condition, and it's about understanding where chronic pain comes from, how it manifests, and how you can help people to self-manage their pain. So giving them strategies for self-management. So that's the sort of background behind it. So it's about managing chronic pain.
Okay.
We've currently got a PhD student, Bronwyn, who is looking at the contextual factors of low back pain. So the contextual factors around a consultation around back pain. And the sort of interesting findings there are there are sort of 5 contextual factors. One is the patient's beliefs about and characteristics about back pain. Another one is the relationship between the therapist or the clinician and the patient. Another one might be the beliefs and characteristics of the clinician. Another one might be the environment. So these are different contextual factors that may help modulate pain, reduce it, or might enhance it.
Okay. What do you mean by the environment? Can we just elaborate on that one a little bit more?
Yeah. So the environment might be coming into a busy hospital with hospital smells and feeling out of place, the receptionist being a bit brusque to you as you sit down in the waiting room, an empty, cold, or a cold, busy waiting room that feels not personal. Going into a cubicle where a curtain is drawn around you, but in the next door cubicle is another patient with a therapist, and you can hear their conversation as much as you can try and hear your conversation with the therapist. All of those sorts of things that don't help a patient feel comfortable in their the environment of the hospital.
Okay, and then the hypothesis sort of thing is that this then feeds into the feeling of chronic pain. Is this what you mean? It sort of affects that somehow?
Yeah, it can. It doesn't help you to feel in a comfortable situation. And again, the sort of 20-minute consultation when actually you've had this pain for many years. This is maybe the 20th clinician. And
you've repeated yourself over and over again to these people.
Right. And you know that in 20 minutes you're never going to be able to get to the bottom of the problem, or never going to be able to explain the story yet again. So compare that then with coming into a quiet waiting room with carpets, with comfortable seating. The receptionist is welcoming. You go in to see the clinician. They've got an hour to see you. They allow you to tell their story. And
these are really important things that often I think just get forgotten about in hospitals.
That's right.
And medical scenarios in general. I mean, hospitals are horrible places to be in.
Absolutely.
Generally.
So absolutely. I mean, we understand the pressure that everybody works at, but it doesn't. Both the clinicians and the patients recognise this as not always the best place to be getting your treatment, especially if it's a sort of a long-term problem, and you've had many visits to the hospital. And certainly these are the things that people with joint hypermobility syndrome said were, I'll go in for a physio appointment, or I'll go and see another clinician or whatever, and they're not listening. They're not listening to the story I've got to tell. And in a way it's not surprising, because they know they've got a waiting list of another 10 that morning. They know that they've got to. They know that they've got to. Try and keep to time. And in that anxiety of trying to keep to time, they aren't necessarily listening.
Yeah, of course.
It's a really tricky situation.
I imagine it's very hard for it not to just become a job. This is a job. I just need to get through this list of people.
Yes, that's right. And I was talking to a colleague. A few weeks ago, and she was saying, really bad. The other day, the computer system went down for 10 or 15 minutes. Wow, you can't do anything because all the notes are on the computer. I know, you don't know who's coming in next. You don't, and you're brought to a standstill. Then you're 10, 15 minutes late for the rest of the day, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So
I think computers are a particular paradox, aren't they? They've helped massively, but they also seem to hinder a lot of the time.
That's right.
The number of times I've been to a receptionist, they say, "Oh, sorry, the computer system's playing up today," or something.
Yeah,
and it's causing them stress because there's a queue of people waiting,
absolutely.
And then that sort of thing.
That's right.
And emails pinging every 2 minutes as well is just an extra additional pressure. I have this theory, which I'm sure is probably written about somewhere, but that as technology improves, we assume that technology is going to allow us to live more free and less stressful lives, but in fact it does almost the opposite. It just allows us to be more efficient and more productive, and therefore our expectations of how much output we have go up in line with the technology that's helped.
Yeah, no,
do you know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely. And so when it doesn't work, we're really stuck.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, for example, today, if today we couldn't get into our email for get online, for half an hour or something, I wouldn't know where my next appointment was, and if we've got a Teams meeting, well, I'll have missed that as well. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you keep a paper diary at all anymore?
No, do you?
No, do I know?
No,
I know a couple
used
of people
to.
who still do. Yeah,
I used to.
But there's something quite nice about that as well. I might go back to that. Make little notes in a journal or something.
Yeah.
I've often tried to keep a journal throughout my life, but it never quite sticks. Sort of a couple of weeks and then I get bored of it.
Yeah.
But then I look back at those 2 weeks.
January the 1st.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The New Year's resolution type thing, and it drops.
This year I'll keep a diary.
That's right. Yeah. I'd like to come back to the first point you made as well about these 5 factors. The first one was how people approach their own pain. Is it their own culture? I think you might have said. I can't remember what you said now. But.
Yeah, no. Well, it's your your beliefs and characteristics.
Word, yeah.
Okay. So, however people get to hear about their beliefs, I've heard people coming in and saying, "I mustn't move. I've slipped a disc, and if I bend, that disc will pop out." And you're wondering, what's going on? What's the picture? What's the picture that person is seeing of that disc slipping out? Or I will hear somebody say, I can't move, I've slipped a disc, it's going to pop out, am I going to end up in a wheelchair? And you're thinking, wow, where did you get to all of those, how did you line those dots up?
Where did the knowledge come from?
Where did the knowledge come from? Is it from, an aunt or something who started with back pain and ended up in a wheelchair? Or so, we need to get to the bottom of that to understand where that pain idea came from.
I see. So do you often ask that question? What gives you that impression of that's going to happen? Do you often ask that?
That's right. I didn't to begin with, but once I began to sort of study this in a little bit more depth and understand people's fears about their pain, yes, that's something that I try and get to the bottom of, and so that kind of feeds into the work that I've done around pregnancy and pain. So, for example, when I was telling colleagues in our Faculty of Health, back in probably 2011, when I was talking about my PhD and how I'd done work around pain, I remember one of our professors of nursing saying to us, "Oh, well, don't talk to the midwives about pain, because they don't believe that pain is important." Anyway, at some stage I got chatting to Professor Venora Hundley, who is a professor in midwifery, and we started to put together some projects, and we had our first PhD student looking at pain management in labour. So Professor Venora Hundley is her research is around early labour pain.
Okay.
And she specifically has been doing a lot of work around
is this like the what do they call it,
Braxton Hicks? Braxton Hicks are a sort of the uterus sort of contracting, and some people get Braxton Hicks towards the end of their pregnancy, as a practice, or that's what you hear about, isn't it? That it's that the muscles are practicing contracting.
Oh, I see. Ready for the big event.
Ready for the big event. Some people don't seem to get Braxton Hicks. It's not until they begin to go into labour that they get that. But that's that sort of, so early labour is the sort of contractions that the uterus is getting ready for the delivery, and the cervix is beginning to dilate. So early labour is before the dilatation of about 4 to 5 centimetres, depending on whether you look at the UK recommendations or the WHO recommendations or the US recommendations, because they all have slightly different.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
No, that's right. I've learned this along the way. It's not necessarily something a physiotherapist necessarily learns, but the midwives have taught me. So the aim was to try and help women manage their pain in early labour, and looking at how the sorts of things that we use to manage musculoskeletal pain. So one of the things was keeping women moving during that early labour. And so we did a randomised controlled trial on the Isle of Wight, looking at using a birth ball to keep people upright and moving. Because again, if you stay upright, then you're more, the gravity helps you with birthing. And if
you don't need to be fighting against another
that's right
thing, gravity on top of everything else you go through.
Well, that's right. So which is what happened when people were then put into a birthing room and laid flat on their back. You've no longer got gravity working to help you to give birth. That's why it's quite nice to be upright and in a pool.
Yes.
But we've also upright and on bean bags, or upright and on on a
ball.
Yeah. Physios call it the Swiss ball. I imagine the Swiss must have invented it or something, and midwives call it a birthing ball.
Okay.
But we had a trial looking at that. The aim is to if women come into hospital too early, they're more likely to have an intervention. That means a cesarean or an epidural or any of the other interventions.
That's really interesting, because I remember from our experience of our first, I think so, more than our second, we called them fairly early on, and they kept saying, give it a bit longer, yeah. And you come in. So that's obviously the reason.
That's right.
I see. Because we were wondering, right. Why can't we just come in now? Like my wife was, come on, I need to.
Yeah, that's right. And so what we're trying to do is, and at the moment, so within that has built into a second study, and now we're trying to sort of, use that work to try and inform women about what they can do to support themselves. So one of the commonest reasons women come into a birthing centre in early labour is because they can no longer manage the pain. And what we have found in our research is that some women will, what we call, are more likely have beliefs and characteristics that mean that pain they associate with a lot of damage, or they associate negatively, and that
more so than men would. You mean? It's hard to say, surely, with the pregnancy thing.
Oh, yes,
you just mean
I don't think this isn't sort of necessarily a comparison between male and females, because males will also we term it catastrophize about their pain. Sometimes I think that's not it's not a great term. It's the way in which we measure it or talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly
but it's a feeling
term.
It's a feeling of that pain may be causing more damage, more injury, and men will feel it as well. Obviously this work has been around women, and women. We've looked at university students both here and in Nepal, and looked at the sort of prevalence of pain, catastrophizing.
Right.
So it's there early on in life. But yes, so following any surgery, some people will ask for more pain relief, probably because they are catastrophizing about their pain. So it's about their pain beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to reduce that catastrophizing around pain, maybe you need to put something in place preoperatively to say, you will feel pain afterwards.
Manage the
You're
expectations.
Not, help manage the expectations.
Do you think this is another case of sort of what we were talking about earlier about early experience of pain, and if you've hurt yourself 100 times by the time you're 10, it doesn't mean much anymore? But do you think it could be down to that as well, and a cultural difference between certain people who are maybe protected from a young age, whereas some maybe rough and tumble and they're hurting themselves every day and then they just get on with it because they're so used to it? Do you think there's an element of that? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
there might be, but there's probably a genetic. There's something. There's nature versus nurture, isn't there?
Yeah.
So there's some
the ever ongoing debate that I have in my mind when I'm raising my children.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got 2 girls, so I'm always just wondering,
Yeah.
Do they love babies because we've given them the babies, or is there some sort of genetic predisposition to wanting to care and nurture? I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, I mean
it boggles my mind.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because you do see that with girls. I think I had a girl and a boy.
Okay.
And I don't think my little boy was that interested in nurturing teddy bears or dolls. He wasn't. He much preferred to pick up a car or or an aeroplane or anything. And I also see that with I've got grandchildren, a boy and a girl, and she's very happy to pick up the dolls and nurture them. But he's much more interested in planes, and he wasn't interested in the teddy bears or dolls or anything like that. No. It's cars and aeroplanes and rockets and.
Do you know? Before I had children, I was convinced that it was almost entirely nurture. That all of these things were just things that parents, you go to a shop with your child for the first time, and if you've got a girl, you've got to go and buy a baby doll. If you've got a boy, you buy an action man or a car or something. I just thought it was almost entirely nurture. But now, with a little bit of experience of parenting and things, I've got much more doubt about that now, and I'm really unsure how much genetics plays a part. I think we're encouraged these days to believe that almost everything is nurture, and that I think it's part of this equality thing in that it's almost counterproductive, but we're trying to assume that everyone starts exactly the same, so that the things that are affecting how well someone ends up in their career, for example, is all due to the cultural impact, of how we raise these people, or the things that the barriers we're putting in place. I think we're encouraged to think like that for equality's sake. And I think also partly because if you start believing that certain people are born with better abilities, for example, that's a very dangerous route to go down politically. So I think we're at a bit of a junction, which is not recognising the role genetics plays for fear of going down, perhaps we could say racist route or sexist route or whatever the characteristic you want to use is. Do you think that's something that's happened? Would you agree with that? Would you?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, so therefore, let's try and use everybody's potential. So women, may have a sort of a nurturing potential, may be really good at mentoring people, and men may be very much more better at strategy and that type of organisation. I don't know how I've made the leap between learning to play with cars and aeroplanes and.
But these stereotypes do seem to manifest themselves.
But these are different things. I remember some years ago, somebody saying that men make better emergency doctors than women because they become less emotional or emotionally involved or emotional about it. I don't know whether that's true, and I don't know whether that continues or whether training has changed to alter that. But I think it's about, and of course there will be differences. There will be some people who can, do multiple can overcome their emotions, or women that can overcome their emotions, and men who can become emotional. So it's not
always
not
a nuance,
absolutely,
of course.
it's a nuance,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But again, I think it's about trying to use everybody's potential in a different way. So I agree. So going back to right at the beginning, we were talking about how do we level the playing field for women, but without making men feel excluded, and I think that it's a fine balance, but it is a balance we need to think about.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's and as you say, nature versus nurture. Probably before I had children, I thought, well, I wanted to give my children both the same opportunity. So, for example, riding a bike. And both were keen on riding a bike, and both learnt to ride a bike quite quickly. And they had that opportunity, and I didn't see a difference between boys and girls.
I think sometimes we can unintentionally stifle opportunities by stereotyping girls and boys at an early age. That's what I've been really conscious of with my own parenting. But then I realise it's not just about me and my wife and how we raise. She encounters thousands of people.
Yes.
By the time she's sort of 10 or whatever the developmental kind of
that's right.
cut off you want
to. And people react to children differently.
Of course, yeah.
You're right.
It's a minefield, really.
It is.
The nature versus nurture thing for me.
Yeah.
It's something I ponder on all the time. I also think it's not a coincidence that the majority of primary school teachers are female, for example, and the majority of building site workers, construction workers are men. Some would argue that that's because of years and years and years of cultural expectations that has happened like that, and others would like to try and level out those playing fields, I'm sure, as well. But I think there comes a point where, as you say, you don't want to push people into doing anything specifically because we're trying to level out some sort of quota. It's about giving people the freedom to choose for themselves. And yet those ones are really specifically tricky problems, particularly the building site thing, because imagine a woman going to work on a building site that's almost all men. How will they feel in that workspace? So there is that boundary that's always going to be there. So I don't know. As I say, it's a minefield for me. We're going slightly off topic. Go on. Did you want to
No. I mean, that'll be the same. In the fire service, for example, I'm sure there are more men than there are women. I'm sure that and again, it's going back to where we need to use our people, with our skills and our potential.
I also worry that certain skills are undervalued, and it seems to be predominantly the nurturing. I mean, people who work in IT, for example, a logic sort of based thing, probably get more paid than a primary or a nursery teacher. So from a actual money perspective, there's a big imbalance there, and God knows what we do with that, because these are sort of market forces at play often, I think, and it's not like you can dictate exactly how much someone gets paid all the time.
No, that's right. I mean, it's interesting to note I'm quite old.
No.
in the fact that
Sorry.
in the fact that I trained a long time ago.
Yeah.
And at that stage, just after I trained, we got equal pay. So prior
For physiotherapists.
Well, or healthcare professions.
Okay.
I think it would be healthcare professions, but I'm not sure. But I think it was prior to 1982 or something. A male physiotherapist would be paid more than a female physiotherapist, and a male nurse is more than a female nurse. Interesting, isn't it?
How did that emerge? Was that just people who were in charge favouring men, maybe subconsciously or consciously, or the fact that men were more happy to put their hands up and demand pay rises and things like that? How would that ever?
I think it was because I'm not. In all fairness, I can't. I don't remember. All I remember was that there was a gender pay difference.
I think there still is across many industries.
But this was a specific one that men were. I think it was because they were classified as being the breadwinner, and that was the reason. But I'm not 100% sure on that one.
But it's still anecdotally interesting.
Yeah, and yes, that's right. So it wasn't until about the 1980s that there was equal pay for doing the same job. Yeah, you were on a banding, and that's exactly what it is today. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the BU Allied Health Professionals, which I also saw on your research profile? So this is BU as in Bournemouth University.
Yeah, so I'm the sort of ambassador for the Allied Health Professionals, so to speak. So the Allied Health Professions are 40. There are 14 professions. That includes physiotherapy, occupational therapy, radiotherapy, speech therapy, drama therapy, prosthetics, orthotics. So there are 14 of those professions. So I sit on the Allied Health Professions Council for Dorset, which is instigated by the Integrated Care Board. The Integrated Care Board was the Integrated Care Services, which was previously the CCG, which was the Clinical Conditioning Group. So that's the group in Dorset that oversee health and social care in Dorset. So we have one CCG in Dorset. Not every county has just one CCG. For example, I think Hampshire has 2 or 3 CCGs, but in Dorset we have one CCG that oversees health and social care, and is the sort of commissions the health and social care for Dorset.
I see. And you're part of the leadership team?
Part of the leadership team there, yeah.
And what sort of challenges does that pose, and what are your aims and goals, both personally and the actual Allied Health Professionals group? What are the aims?
So the aims are around sort of things like workforce planning, careers, Allied Health Professions careers. So the Allied Health Professions en masse are much smaller than nursing. So in the NHS, I think there are about over 600,000 nurses, and there are over 100,000 doctors. And then the next group are the group of Allied Health Professions, and I'm not sure how many of those, about 100,000 or whatever, in the NHS. But it made up of all those small groups. And the biggest group of Allied Health Professions are physiotherapists. But they're kind of... when you hear on the news, you hear about doctors and nurses. Sometimes you hear paramedics and physiotherapists, but nobody really hears necessarily the rest of the allied health professions. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that allied health professionals also have a career framework, also have an ability to progress their careers in the NHS. And that's now being recognised a great deal more by the National Institute for Health Research, the NIHR, who are building on that and wanting to build research careers for allied health professionals and nurses and midwives. So from a personal perspective, what I really want to do is to build the research capacity of allied health professionals in Dorset, and to ensure we've got a pipeline. So I work on the career development and education sort of part of ARC Wessex, which is the Applied Research Collaboration for Wessex.
Lots of acronyms to remember here, aren't there?
That's right. So that's with Southampton University, Winchester University and Portsmouth University. And we have been involved in providing internships for clinicians. They might get, so an internship would involve them having a research area that they would like to study. They come and spend 1 day a week working on their research. They might do a literature review unit with us at Bournemouth University, supervised by a member of staff. and then they might, and that might sort of help them develop their next research question, which they might take forward with another bit of funding, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And we also link in with Health Education England, which is no longer, because it's now become NHS Education, NHSE, Southwest, where they also give out internships, and then there are, so following the internships, then there are pre-doctoral internships, and then people can go on and do a PhD with NIHR funding.
Ah.
The good news about NIHR funding is it funds your full salary. Now, it's highly competitive. What we've also managed at Bournemouth University is to provide match-funded PhD studentships between Bournemouth University and, it could be University Hospitals Dorset, or Dorset County Hospital, or Dorset Healthcare. So we've been providing those opportunities as well. So I'm really keen to, grow the careers and grow the research in Dorset. So that's my link with the allied health professions. So we've set up a group called Dawn, which is Dorset Opportunities in Research Network, and we also link in with the Southwest and the Clinical Research Network. That's the CRN. So lots of these acronyms,
all linking together through you.
Well, no, not necessarily, but that's the way in which we're trying to sort of grow the careers.
Great. So it keeps you busy.
So it keeps you busy.
Very busy by the sounds of things. You touched on the NHS there. What's your opinion on the current state of the NHS and where we're going with that and all that stuff? How do you see that playing out and whatever?
Yeah, I mean, through these internships, obviously I'm in constant contact with people from the NHS. I mean, probably almost on a daily basis, and we also have all our students spend weeks every year in the NHS as part of their training. Our colleagues in the NHS are under a lot of strain. They're working incredibly hard, and this again is feeding into the fact that they can't then necessarily take up the opportunities of the internships because they're just too busy, or we can't, if they were going to be pulled out for a day a week for 6 months, then the managers are finding it difficult to backfill that position. We have people going into the NHS and thinking, whoa, I can't work at this pressure all the time, and therefore I might work 3 days in the NHS and 2 days doing something else, either in private practice or doing something completely different. There's lots of lots of difficulties. So that's why, and although we've just had the 15-year workforce plan, that may take 10 years for us to notice. By the time you've trained everybody up and brought the levels up, especially as we are.
What is the workforce plan? Is a plan to get more people into working in the NHS?
That's right. Yeah. So the government announced that, I think it was last week, the 15-year workforce plan.
This current government seemed keen on disbanding the NHS and sort of running it into the ground in order to promote private healthcare. Would you agree with that? And what are your thoughts?
No, I don't think. Well, that's not my impression. And in relation to the NHS workforce plan, as far as I know, this is 15 years and is in all the parties have agreed to this, so that whoever wins at the next election, it will stay in process. It will continue.
Okay, that's good.
So, that, you know,
where do you think the pressure is coming in terms of funding? Because it seems underfunded. I don't know how true that is, but
yes, and of course.
Or do you think this is just sort of news rhetoric?
No. I do feel that it feels underfunded, and I mean, is it part of the problem with inflation? I mean, we see that in universities, don't we? We see that funding for universities through student fees was capped at 9,200, or what is it, 250? I can't
Something
remember
like that,
in 2017, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how much is that worth in 2023? And is that the same problem that the NHS are feeling?
Could be.
You know, everything costs more.
Yes.
Salaries have gone up. Food for you know, power for
Energy.
keeping the energy, keeping the hospitals going. IT. Think of the massive IT change. Prior to COVID, many of my colleagues probably had access to a computer. They certainly didn't have their own computer in the NHS, and yet overnight, everybody, you know, many people were doing face-to-face consultations. Think of that massive change in the IT system.
So do you think this is a problem that will rectify itself over time, or do you think this is a downward trajectory that needs drastic change in order to sort of save the NHS?
I don't think I know enough about it to say.
I enjoy talking to academics because you're very careful and very measured in your response to things, and it's very opposite to the sensationalist sort of news, opinions and things we hear on social media. I think that's why I most enjoy doing this podcast, because I'm talking to people who, you know, genuinely think deeply about things and then are careful with what they say so as not to, you know, kick up the dust or whatever you want to say. And I like that you're measured in your responses here. You know, if it's not your area of expertise, most of the guests I've had on just say I'd rather not comment.
Right.
Which I think we could use more of in the world.
Yeah, maybe.
People saying I don't know, I don't want to comment because I'm not sure. And that to be an acceptable thing as well, you know?
Yes.
We put these people in front of a TV, in front of a camera, and you expect them to answer everything like they're the oracle.
Yeah. And yet, if we sit here and we have very little expertise.
Exactly. Which is why I'm asking you all the questions and hope that you might. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, in my heart, I worked in the NHS. I don't work in the NHS now because I'm an academic. But you know, I think it's a fantastic institution, and the work that colleagues have done, and there are some excellent elements of the NHS. Imagine, you know, your GP can see an X-ray that was taken in the hospital, and if you went to another hospital, they will be able to access that X-ray. Nowhere in the world else in the world can that sort of thing happen. Because for example, if you go to the States and you have your X-ray done in one hospital,
is that almost owned by that hospital? Is it the copyright of that hospital?
That's
almost?
Probably the copyright of that hospital.
Crikey, I've never even
that
considered
sharing.
that.
Sometimes people are allowed their notes, but and X-rays. Just it depends on different places, but.
Yeah.
Very often you can't take those round with you.
Wow. And so much medical advancement has come out of the NHS as well, hasn't it?
I mean, absolutely.
I almost applied for funding to produce an NHS film, but in the end it was just too much on my plate at the time. But I remember reading a big long list of like 100 things that the NHS has produced in terms of research or advancements. Can't remember any of them off the top of my head right now. But yeah, it was just amazing to me.
Yeah.
Do you know any of them? So we can give some examples now.
Oh, what? The NIHR?
Oh, no, just some of the advancements that the NHS has made in terms of medical research or anything like that. I can't think. Is penicillin one of them or something like that? I can't remember now.
Well, yes.
I wish I'd researched it before
that
this.
That might have been... Was that... I can't remember whether that's post-NHS or pre-NHS. Yeah, so but yes, absolutely. There have been many.
I'll have to link to that document in the comments section or something, so people can look at that for themselves, because I can't remember off the top of my head right now.
But there are many advancements. But for example, the AstraZeneca vaccine that was developed in Oxford will have been developed in conjunction with the NHS. All the NIHR funding that is given for research is aimed at making sure that the research is driven by clinical need. So that's why they want clinicians engaged in the research, working with a university to help them with the sort of methodology and that sort of thing. And the other thing is, the NIHR really wants the patient's voice to come through on research. So that isn't just for clinicians to improve assessment or interventions, but interventions that patients feel that they could be engaged with, and research that patients feel that they've had a say in. So in healthcare research and social care, we try and get the voice of our patients, our clients, in that research, in the interventions that we carry out, so that any intervention. So, for example, if you want to get somebody engaged in exercise, what is it that will help them engage in exercise? We all know that exercise is good for you. We all know that being physically active is good for you. But what keeps us going? And that's a magic pill that nobody necessarily has the answer to.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can give you an answer from my experience, from my own personal experience. It was always about being part of a team and not wanting to let the team down. So I've always played football all my life, and waking up on a Sunday morning in the freezing cold of December, if it was an individual thing, I would never have gone out. I would have just said, no, I'm staying in bed. But there's a team of players expecting you to show up, and if you don't, there'll be a player short. And if everyone did that, we would never be able to play any games. So then you go out, you do it, and then within 10 minutes, the cold is gone because you're boiling hot, running around, and it's fine. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it was always about not wanting to let other people down. I imagine for some people, they're more. It's about not wanting to let themselves down, perhaps. But for me, it was never about that. It was about not wanting to let other people down.
No, that's really good to hear. It's interesting. We looked at community-based exercise groups in Dorset to see what kept people going. And what kept people going was the social interaction. So the social interaction is really important, and more important probably, interestingly enough, for women. Okay. Certainly women of that age group, that was in their 50s and above, or 60s and above, right. Because they liked the socialisation afterwards. So the exercise was part of it, but having a cup of tea afterwards was the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake, absolutely. But you're right. Team games and doing things with others. So things like taking your dog for a walk. That can be an important element, because you've got to walk the dog.
Yes,
it's not you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for somebody else. The dog, something else, your pet or whatever. But I think you're right. We need to be able to, and so we need to be able to engage with somebody, and for somebody else to be saying, have you done your exercises today? Or and some sort of encouragement, and so that we can get back to them. I've done mine.
I used to always dread that question when I was having physio. How well have you been getting on with your exercises? Because as soon as I went home, other things got in the way, and I was never very good at keeping up with physiotherapy whenever I had it.
No. I'm sure, and that's the same with everybody. And so that's something that we kind of need to learn from. What keeps people going, and it would be better to have a sort of group rehabilitation.
That requires people with the same sort of injuries at the same time, perhaps, or something.
I think you could adapt it. I think you could. We used to. I know when I back in the 80s, we used to adapt a session for footballers. I mean, at that stage, I think they were Chelsea footballers, because they didn't have a physiotherapy at that stage.
Wow.
And they used to come along to the
Can you
gym
imagine that now?
following their, a knee, some knee injury. And we used to have the kind of the active knee class or something like that.
See.
But we would adapt it for each person. But they would spend a minute on each station.
I see.
And the physio would be there facilitating, encouraging.
I'm sure that would work well now as well. While we're on the subject of exercise and sort of barriers to exercise and things, we had a really interesting conversation on our online video call last week or whenever it was, about some of the barriers that women face, particularly after giving birth, with pelvic floor muscles. Could you enlighten us on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it opened my eyes massively when you sort of told me the origin and then what it can lead to.
Yeah. So, following childbirth, for numerous reasons, and even during pregnancy, women's pelvic floor muscles can become weaker. And that might be, during pregnancy, it might be the pressure of the baby, the pressure of gravity and the baby and the fluid in the womb that's pressing down on the pelvic floor, that can make you a bit more liable to leak urine, and with that comes that sort of feeling of not wanting to do things. It might be not wanting to go out because you'll need to spend a penny more regularly. But postnatally, that can be quite common. I can't remember the statistics offhand, but I think it's somewhere between 35% and 50% of women postnatally may have some sort of urine leak, and therefore many women are able to try and get access to a pelvic health physio to address that problem sort of within sort of about 6 weeks of having their baby. Having said that, I don't know how. It probably depends on where you are as to how much focus there is in that area as to whether you get access. But this can be really important because 80% of stress incontinence can be treated by just contracting your pelvic floor muscles and learning to contract them again. So when I say learning to contract them again, if, for example, you have had pain somewhere, you may your brain may kind of be inhibited in contracting those muscles. Now you might remember that with your knee. So when you had your initial knee injury, probably the physiotherapist would have said, "Oh, you're not quite contracting your quadriceps muscle as you were before."
It's still problematic now, to be honest.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes that and that will be the same with the pelvic floor muscles. Now,
Okay.
of course, with the pelvic floor muscles, we can't see them, but we can feel them. Having said that, some women don't quite understand how to contract those pelvic floor muscles, and that's where a session with a pelvic floor physiotherapist who can teach you how to contract your muscles can be really helpful, and then you can go away and practice that. Now, the research suggests that you need to be practicing daily and several times daily for about 3 months for that to work. Anecdotally, we hear that many women, that they can get a good result in less time. And once they get the feeling of contracting their muscles, then they can remember to contract them and keep them contracted. Now, so that, you know, when they sneeze or whatever, they don't leak, or when they try and run. Because again, I think we were talking about activity. If, for example, you leak every time you try and go for a run, that's going to probably put you off going for a run, or playing with the children, jumping on the trampoline and being active. So it may be one reason why women are less physically active than men. We do know that women are less physically active than men, and then that plays out through life. So when women go through the menopause, their muscles get weaker. That's all part of that change. We can see that sometimes in the leg muscles and arm muscles, but that also happens with your pelvic floor muscles. So again, that may be a time where they begin to leak again, and that may be a time where they need to think about contracting their pelvic floor muscles and re-engaging them. You know, because it may be for periods of many years they haven't leaked, and then post-menopausally or during the menopause they may begin to leak again.
So this is sort of a circular problem in that the muscles relax naturally, which makes you perhaps leak urine, which makes you less likely to exercise, which means your muscles become weakened over time.
That's
so it's just a circular. Okay.
Yeah, but it going through the menopause, then that's because of the sort of hormonal changes, that's your natural progression, is that women weaken, and they certainly seem to weaken more than the men. So they have, we talk about we talk about their, you know, muscle weakness, and we also talk about changes to their bones. But I also spoke about the fact that, so if you're less physically active, then things like your balance become, you're not challenging your balance any longer or as much. So you then become more likely to fall. And obviously when you get older, we know, for example, the second commonest reason for going into a nursing home is because somebody has urinary incontinence.
And do the statistics show that, and also that older women fall more than older men because of this balance thing?
It will be that's right.
Yeah.
That women do fall more likely to then fracture their neck or femur. So it's probably a combined thing. They're more likely to fall, but then when they do fall, they're more likely to fracture because of the osteoporosis that comes with getting older.
Which all could potentially all stem from the pelvic floor muscle problem right from the start. So this quite small, relatively speaking, issue can lead to much greater issues later on.
That's right. Difficult to say, because on the way there are probably many complex issues that happen. But these are things that we need to consider.
Absolutely. And this is a really prevalent thing for me, because my wife's nan has just gone into a care home because she had a fall, broke her ankle, and perhaps, you know, they're not sure if she'll be coming out. And my nan has also just gone into a care home, partly because of incontinence, and she's in there now. That's, you know, where she lives now. Yeah. So it's really, you know, both of those things are really what's the word? Oh, crikey, sorry, hit the mic. Both really prevalent for me right at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that this is something that not many people want to talk about. Yeah. Women don't talk about their incontinence. Women think that following childbirth and the fact that they're leaking is just a minor problem. And they don't come forward and try and contact anybody to get any help. It may be because
sort of an acceptance of it. It's like, okay, this is my body now, sort of thing.
That's right. And very often they don't actually even share it with anybody. And more recently we've had midwives, when they see people antenatally, will say to them, how are you today? And the person says, oh yeah, no, all's fine, and they'll do the antenatal examination as they would. They're now beginning to say, have you got any urinary leakage? And they're quite surprised at the number of women who have urinary leakage in antenatally before birth. And that's much more prevalent than they had anticipated.
But they're just not forthcoming with that when you ask, are there any problems?
That's right.
You need to be very specific about the question.
Exactly. And it might be because when somebody comes to talk about their baby, they think that the clinician is focused on the baby. So for that a midwife is focused on the baby. It's just like if you come to see a physiotherapist, you probably tell them about your leg pain and your knee pain, but you won't tell them that you've got postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome or gastrointestinal problems, which earlier on in our conversation were some of the symptoms that people with Ehlers-Danlos have. So they don't just have one thing. So they may come to see the physiotherapist because they've got knee pain or back pain or chronic pain, but then they don't necessarily think the physiotherapist wants to hear that they've got all these other
which
issues,
could all be linked.
Which are all linked, and chronic fatigue, etc. So some of those sorts of things aren't shared. Whereas if you go to see your gynecologist, you'll probably tell them about your gynecological problems, but you might not tell them that you get migraines or whatever. So people choose thinking that the clinician will only want to hear about the one thing. I think that's part of the problem. Yeah.
So the message is, talk more about this.
Absolutely.
Understand it's a problem that starts from a fairly relatively trivial point, but can lead to much bigger problems down the line.
That's right.
So sort it out early if you can.
Yeah, and I mean there are. We reckon that probably there will be children at school also who have urinary leakage that keep very quiet about it, and it might be something that really needs to be addressed earlier on in schools as well, to sort of so that young girls know about it beforehand.
Well,
yeah.
Shall we talk about the images that you've brought in today? Or that you sent
certainly.
to me, rather.
Yeah.
So I think we'll start with this one underneath because you already mentioned that earlier on. So for those watching on YouTube or on Spotify, you can watch on Spotify as well. This is a poster for the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health at Bournemouth University. Can you talk to us a little bit about this, if you haven't already?
Yeah, so as I explained earlier, we've recently changed the Centre for Midwifery, Maternal and Perinatal Health to include women's health, and in order to shorten the name, we've called it the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health, and we're going to be launching that on Friday, July the 14th, 2023, in case you're watching afterwards. The research is covering 4 broad themes in the Centre of Midwifery and Women's Health, and that is care in early labour, infant feeding and postnatal care, improving care for mothers and babies in low and mid-income countries, and women's health.
Just a quick interruption from me here to say that the microphone audio does cut out. Thankfully, it's only for 2 minutes and we do still have audio on the camera, so it shouldn't affect your enjoyment of the podcast too much.
And in relation to women's health, we will be looking at the broader perspective of women's health, not just women's pelvic health, but women's health through the lifespan. And also we've got sports and exercise and sports psychology programs here at Bournemouth University. We'll definitely be looking at women's health in sport. Really important now that we're seeing professional footballers come back to their professional game following maternity leave, and needing to get back into playing as fully fledged sportswomen. So these elements are really important. Obviously, we've seen some athletes coming back to sport following, the birth of babies. I mean, for example, you've seen Serena Williams, the way she came back. She did a great job coming back after the birth of her child. And we need to make sure that, everyone is being supported to come back to their professional sport, well, even non-professional sport, to help them maintain their fitness and careers. Yeah.
Could we take a break there, because I've just realised that the SD card on the microphones has run out of space.
Okay.
And I don't know how long it's been like that. Luckily we're recording audio on there as well. It might not be as good. I apologise to everyone listening if the sound has deteriorated halfway through this podcast. I'm really sorry. Hopefully we've got most of it. I've only just looked down and realised it's stopped recording. But I need a toilet break as well. Anyway, as it happens, fairly topically. So can we continue in 5-10 minutes?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, welcome back. We just had a quick break. I've now put an SD card back in the audio recorder. That's another haphazard error that occurs when you're doing these things solo. So I do apologise for anyone who's been listening, and the audio, as I say, got worse halfway through. Hopefully we got most of that stuff captured nicely through these mics to begin with. Great. So we talked about the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health, which this is launching, you say, on this coming Friday, which we've already said the date, so we don't need to repeat that. What about these images here? What do these mean to you?
So the image at the top, I have a niece who is good at drawing, and I said to her, when I was sort of trying to disseminate my research around Ehlers-Danlos and joint hypermobility syndrome, I wanted an image that I could have on a slide, and I showed her a picture, and she drew that for me. So
wow.
It's an image that I have on many slides when I'm talking about joint hypermobility syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that's that picture. And then the one.
How old is your niece? Sorry, is she adult?
Oh, she's adult now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But she was still at school when she drew
Really?
it for me.
That's
so
fantastic, isn't it?
I still use it.
And it makes for a nice sort of a logo, almost like a branding type thing. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's
so
really great.
That's what I use. And then, and in fact, I think we used it for the. We had a pain conference. I think it was in 2014 or 15. We had a Dorset pain conference, and I had it on the as a logo for that as well. And then the picture below is a picture of Oman. It's a lovely picture up what we would call a wadi, which is a dry riverbed. I mean, there is actually water at the bottom of that riverbed.
There's a little bit of water. Yeah.
And that just kind of reminds me, because my first published work was a prevalent study of joint hypermobility syndrome in Oman.
Oh, right.
And
That's a really beautiful image, isn't it?
It's a beautiful
stunning.
image. I mean, it's a beautiful country, Oman, and we thoroughly enjoyed living there. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so we'll blue tack both of those up on the wall. I've forgotten to get the blue tack out this morning as well, so that's another thing. But I'll put them up after we're done. Okay, the final thing I just really want to ask is more of a general question, which is in your own words, why do you think research and academic research in particular is so important? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I think in respect to physiotherapy, many of the things we do don't have an evidence base. If we are going to continue paying for that therapy in the NHS, then I believe we need to have the evidence behind it.
What sort of things do you mean that don't have an evidence-based? Examples, like some of the exercises you prescribe and things like this, or
it might be the type of exercise, and it might be the number of exercises that we prescribe. But again, it goes back to we clearly need to ensure that we engage a person in those exercises. There's no point in us giving out exercises and then nobody's doing them. we need to understand why people are not doing them if they're going to come to the physiotherapist. And
it's a hard topic to broach with a patient, because whenever I've not done my exercises, I feel firstly guilt.
Yep.
And secondly, that I'm undermining the physiotherapist who's giving me those exercises, and neither of those things are the things that I want to openly share with the physiotherapist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and yet you got better.
Well, you could argue it's hard to know whether my improvement would have been quicker, or maybe my just talking about my knee right now, whether it would be stronger than it is today if I'd continued with my physio better. You know, if I'd been really stringent. Like, I'm sure there are some people who do it, you know, really, really well. I've just never been very good at foresight and looking after myself particularly well.
And so I think in those cases, and everybody's different. We've recognised that all the way along here. So therefore, understanding that some people will go away and do their exercises, and others need some help. What sort of help do they need in order to do those exercises, in order to make that knee as strong as possible, so they're not going to get re-injured in football the following week or in 3 months' time? And I think those are the sorts of things that we need to be looking at. Now, it's not easy research. It's and there isn't an easy methodology. It's not like doing a randomised controlled trial where you're taking one tablet with a placebo and looking at the difference. You know, it requires some creative methodologies in order for us to understand how people think about their exercise. But if we could work out those people who will go away and do their exercises, okay, but those people who want some help, want some, social interaction with the exercises, then we can make these interventions more bespoke. For example, it might be that if you were to have a competition with other people around doing your exercises, and be linked in with other people and be feeding back to your therapist on a weekly basis or daily basis, these are the exercises I'm doing, and you get a thumbs up or something like that for doing the exercises. Are those the sorts of things that will motivate? Some people they will motivate, others they won't. But it's about how do we get that engagement?
Yeah. For me, going in and seeing the physiotherapist was good motivation, and it would sort of spike my motivation for a short while. And then day-to-day routines take over. Habit forming is always a difficult thing, I think. Forming a new habit,
That's right.
It's sort of like this, you fight internally against yourself whenever you're trying to make a good new habit.
That's right. And I mean, personally, I think... I know when I worked in an American sports medicine clinic and for a short time, and I think bringing people in on a daily basis, it was part of their daily routine to come in and do their rehabilitation. Well, that helped them because they had to do it. They were bought into it. They came in. They did that over a number of weeks until they were fit enough to go back and play. But that isn't something that's on offer, necessarily in the NHS.
Yeah, of course,
and so we've got to sort of think of different ways around this and ways of encouraging people and getting people engaged. Because a lot of this you can do on your own, but as you say, it requires a motivation.
So you see the job as researchers not just focusing on the injury itself, which I'm sure there's lots and lots of research into knee injuries, for example, but also the approach that
That's
medical
right.
professionals take to this. And there must be all sorts of different ways you can research this field.
Yes.
In that respect.
Yeah.
And everything in life.
Yeah, and everything in life. I mean, I suppose my areas of thinking about health and social care research. There's so much we do that is good, but we don't necessarily have the evidence behind it. So that when clinical commissioning groups are saying, well, where's the evidence that is effective and that has an impact and that improves people's outcome by 20% or their quality of life by X. Sometimes we don't have that information, and I think it's more and more important that we're able to to
justify
and demonstrate that information going forward. Yeah.
And as you say, that could be applied generally more broadly for all research in all aspects of life.
Yes.
One would assume.
Well, I would assume, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's happening all the time in things like marketing. I mean, you wouldn't carry on with something if you found that it didn't improve a market, would you? You know, if you were advertising something and it didn't.
So even informal sort of research is
absolutely.
Same
I mean,
sort of thing.
For example, in media, I imagine that if the number of people watching a program drops off, you probably
reconsider what you're doing in some way.
That's right. And I think those are the sorts of things that we try and do in the health service. People do service evaluations to check that the service that they're doing is right for the patients at the time. And the other thing is that people change, and the way in which we behave change. As younger people will behave in a different way to older people. Younger people might be very happy with online consultations. Older people, find the technology just too difficult and want a face-to-face, a proper face-to-face consultation. So
these sorts of studies really are a never-ending thing. As culture changes and shifts over time, we need to readdress these issues over and over again. So it's really is a never-ending endeavour.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. I think we'll finish it there. Professor Carol Clark, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. I think your work is amazing, insightful, and really worthy of all the effort you put into it. And hopefully, it leads to better health for everyone, and women specifically.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.